Hello, everybody, and welcome to PPG, Purpose, Passion, Grit. It's great to see some new names here, as well as some, I was going to say old faces, but you know what I mean. Those of you who've been with Goldster for a while. I'm absolutely thrilled today to welcome Carolyn Hornblow, who's the author of this book, After a Life-Threatening Diagnosis, What's Next? And we're going to talk about her work as a nurse, as an alternative therapist, and about what she thinks the new approach to healing and talking about life and death should be. So Carolyn, welcome to Goldster. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucinda.
So this is a book that obviously you felt really there was a kind of a need for it. And the subtitle is A New Approach to Improving Healing Potential, Communications and Life Quality. Why did you come to the decision that this was a book that needed to be written? What was the experiences that you had that made you think this book needs to be done?
Well, through my nursing, I've met various people with cancer, and historically, we don't give them permission to express their fears. It would tend to say, and this is doctors as well as nurses, will say, oh, don't worry, there's a 90% success rate. And so being human, we think, well, what if I'm in the 10%? And that tends to fester in the back of the mind. We try to appear positive because we're dealing with a scary illness and wondering if we're going to survive it. And so we worry about this, especially at nighttime when we're lying in bed. And it tends to be, if you do then express it to the medical and nursing profession, they'll say, oh, no, you just need to be positive, you'll be fine. If you express it to family and friends, they don't quite know what to say. They want to be supportive. But again, you don't really want to worry them, and they don't want to worry you. So it just sits and festers. And I believe that festering creates a negative impact, because dogs and cat animals do not heal well if they're stressed. That's a known fact. So if we can reduce some of the stresses, we're not going to eliminate them, but we can reduce a percentage of them. That percentage of being reduced can increase the healing potential, because with less negative stress, you'll have more positive energy. And so I believe that healing can be improved, and the success rate could be even better if we're allowed right from the beginning to express our concerns. Because it's an old saying of, a fear shared or a problem shared is a problem halved. So it just reduces that running in the background energy a degree, which in turn can improve the potential to heal. And so that was one of the things. I remember speaking to a nurse who was running the oncology ward, and I said, well, do you allow people to express their concerns? Oh, no, that's far too negative. But these poor people are sitting there for 6-8 hours getting chemotherapy, and the reality is, they're facing a possibility. We're very good when it gets to being when the doctors and the doctors decide you are terminal, that they can't do anything more for you. Then hospice comes in, and home care, and there are nurses specially trained, and there's all sorts of support. Like the Maggie centers, which gives support. It's this interim between the initial diagnosis and the decision as to whether you've been fixed or not. And that can take 5 years, because if you're going through initial diagnosis and then maybe radiotherapy and chemotherapy, and then you wait 2 or 3 years to see if it returns, that's a long period of time to have a worry going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really seems that this is so important. I mean, reading through it and thinking, gosh, yes, there are huge gaps in the care. That's not to say people aren't caring, the nurses and doctors aren't caring for them, but that perhaps not understanding, because if they're lucky enough to have not been in that situation themselves, how can they understand that? Before we come back to the book, let's talk about how you got to writing it. So tell us about your career. What age did you start nursing, and what was it that particularly drew you towards this type of care?
I started at 19, but according to my mother, from the age of 6, I wanted to be a nurse. Right. And my parents didn't want me to. They wanted me to go into medicine. It was like, no, I want to be a nurse at the bedside. And so I went to Edinburgh, School of Nursing at the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh. And then I did my midwifery. And then I went to Australia because I had friends there. And the pay in Britain's not very good, and there was sunshine and better pay. So I went to friends in Sydney and worked there, and I did an intensive care course that was quite unique at the time. It was a 1-year intensive care course. And then I went on to America because I've always been a bit of a restless spirit. And so I wanted to go, my cousin was living in San Francisco at the time. So I got my exam, my American nurses qualification, which was basically, it was mostly question. It was a multiple choice question, 5 different papers, all sorts of people there. It was quite intimidating, people with babies, and I'd never done multiple choice. I was used to the training where it was essays.
Yes.
And so, and I knew very little about pediatrics, and I was, researching, the different childhood illnesses. And when the papers came along, it said, well, at 18 months, does little Jimmy roll over, stand up, talk? And of course, not having a child myself, I had no idea. Anyway, I managed to scrape through that one. So anyways, I got qualified in that. And then I started working, well, actually for a while, I went off and was a sales rep for a couple of years. And then I came back to nursing and was nursing in intensive care and then advice nursing. And how I came to do this was I was doing some meditation, and I was sort of inspired to do something, to write something chiefly about how we don't allow people to express their fears. And I found myself waking at 4 in the morning, 4 in the morning, for 2 hours every day, went back to bed at 6 and slept for 2 hours till I had to go to work. And then I did that solidly every day for 3 weeks, and then it stopped. And at that point, I basically had the outline for the book. And then I put in a few personal experiences that I'd had. As a nurse, very often people will talk to you, whereas they won't talk to doctors. We're getting better at that, but it's like people do not want to bother the doctor, or if they express a concern, it's almost viewed like, well, I've already told you, don't worry about it. It's 90% success rate. So you don't want to question the doctor too much. And, it's good. I encourage people to go with a pad of paper or just something when they go and see the doctor, and have a list of questions that you want, because when you're in the room, you will tend to forget the questions. And also, if you're writing down the answers, and I know this shouldn't be, but I do believe that we give answers better and more thoroughly if you know they're being written down.
That's such a good tip, and I hope that anybody listening to this today is able to take that on board. I think it's very important, if you can't have a second person in there with you, to write things down when the doctor says something. Now, do remember, everybody, of course, you can put any questions in the chat. So if there's any questions or comments that you'd like to put in there, please do type them into the chat. You can send them either directly to me, or you can put it into everybody. So when you were working in America and you were working in Australia, what were the differences that you noticed? I mean, apart from the better weather in Australia, what were the differences that you noticed? And in terms of the healthcare system, did you think it was kind of better or worse? Was it just very different in many ways, or was it similar?
Two different. In Australia, I found that a lot of the research we were doing in Britain and the techniques were implemented, and they had the money to do it, whereas NHS didn't. So, I mean, for a simple thing was the treatment trolleys were much better. They were newer, whereas we were still in Britain dealing with sort of not rusty ones, but we just didn't have the money for the ideas, whereas Australia did. In America, the difficulty I had there is I was on the West Coast, California, and on the East Coast, I believe it's slightly different. I'm not quite sure why, but if you had, they're very aware of being sued, and so what would happen is the doctor would come in, and they oftentimes would go into the room with the patient by themselves. They wouldn't have us go in with them, Not that they weren't allowed to, it was just that it wasn't really being done. Then they would come out and they would supposedly read our notes, and then they would issue their orders for the day. So you might not even know the doctor had been in to see your patient because you were busy in another room. So you'd come back to the desk and you would see this chart flagged, and you would read the instructions for the day. With one point, I actually discovered that the doctor had come in and removed a drain out of my patient, and I was in Britain we would have shortened the drains. And I was upset that he hadn't come to find me, because that patient was my responsibility for that 8 hours. And I remember a couple of times when I went in, followed the doctor into the room, they would always look at me like, kind of like, why are you here? Whereas in Britain and in Australia, you do the rounds together. You know, you go in and the doctor will ask you, what's your opinion? They'll ask if the physio's there, what's their opinion? It was more a team thing, whereas and also there was less independence. We could not change the frequency of taking vital signs unless it had been written down. Whereas in Australia and Britain, we were allowed to have our own independent initiative to do it.
Right. So very, very different. Interesting. It's the same in Australia and the UK, but not.
Yes.
Not in the States. Wow.
Yes.
So do you feel that you've got you had more autonomy as a nurse in Australia and the UK than in America?
Yes. Yes. It was autonomy to a degree, but we were more limited in America. Yeah. And I think it purely was to do with possibility of being sued.
Of course. Yeah. Yes, I think it's really fascinating. I teach American students, and sometimes I'm absolutely amazed at their different expectations. And recently I had a student who needed to use the NHS, and she was so scared of being charged, and they were saying, this is emergency medicine, you're fine. You know, she was really nervous that it wasn't going to be covered by her insurance. And that to me was so shocking, that to think she'd had an accident, she needed to call an ambulance, that she was so frightened, and we were all trying to reassure her that it was okay. And I thought, gosh, I felt very lucky. I know the NHS is starved of cash, but I felt very lucky to be living in a country with an NHS service.
Absolutely, absolutely, because it's dreadful. There's probably about a third of the Americans don't get medical care because they can't afford the insurance. I mean, the insurance is prohibitive. We're talking $200, $300 a month. And even then they can decide to eliminate part of the care, or you have to do a down payment. And everything is charged to you, like even a Band-Aid. Not so much in the hospital I worked in, because we were it was Kaiser, and it was called an HMO, Health Maintenance Organization. But the more common hospitals, the more normal private hospitals, you know, if you had to give a Band-Aid to a patient, you actually had to take a tab off that Band-Aid and put it on the charge card. I mean, a Band-Aid. It was ridiculous. So you can imagine if a doctor comes in and does a consultation, or they actually dress a wound or do something.
Yes. Gosh,
that's another thing with the dressing of the wound is that in America, we would be told what wound dressing to use, whereas in Australia and Britain, we, the nurses, decided what was going to be the treatment for the wound.
Yeah, right. We've got a comment here. As a physio from South Africa and Germany, I also found them very restrictive and limiting. I'm assuming that's working in Germany. I'm not sure whether you were also working in the States as well. But anyway, so obviously just very different experience from being in South Africa and then being in Germany. We've got another comment here. I always went to my husband's appointments and asked the questions. It was often too overwhelming for him to take in, which is pretty much what you were saying then, wasn't it, Carolyn?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you don't often know you're going to be given the diagnosis of having a cancer, but when the initial diagnosis comes along, when anybody hears the word cancer, I think you kind of go into a bit of a daze. And that's why I'm a great advocate, is get that information out, but then go with somebody, a professional, into another room where you can talk about a little bit before you get sent home. And then come back again maybe a week later, and start to ask your questions. Because as soon as you hear that word cancer, it's just, I would advocate having somebody go with you. Yeah.
And that's why places like Maggie's Centre, I will actually in a minute, I'll put a note in, I'll put the link in. If you don't know about Maggie's Centres, maybe we could talk about them a bit later. We've got a clarification here. It was working in Germany that was very restrictive and limiting as compared to South Africa. So isn't it fascinating how each country is so different?
Yes.
Now we have a question here. What would Carolyn advise someone to do while they're waiting for a procedure which could give a cancer diagnosis?
That's a hard. What would I expect them to do? Basically, relax as much as possible. Better to know the diagnosis as soon as possible so you can get treated, because the earlier the diagnosis is made, the bigger chances you have of recovering. That's why getting mammograms, getting pap smears, be proactive, and if you haven't been invited to go have one, call up and say, I'd like one. Mammograms, you're entitled to get them. I believe it's every 2 years. And
Depends
for women,
where you are in the country, it varies.
well, yeah, and then pap smears, and also for men, making sure they get a PSA check. And if they haven't had one, then ask for one.
So this is someone who it seems to be waiting for a procedure which could give a cancer diagnosis. So they're already in that stage of obviously worrying, as not surprisingly. But you're saying the best thing to do is to try and de-stress as much as possible.
Yes, and also you will rarely get an immediate diagnosis. You'll have the biopsy done, have somebody to take you home, have somebody to hold your hand and feel that you've got, or a friend, family member, whoever, ideally that would be the situation, because you're probably not going to get the result for a few days after that. Yeah.
Thank you. So yes, so I think just make sure you're taking care of yourself, and get somebody to go with you, and make sure you've got someone to talk to as well. Yes. We have another comment here. I remember when I was diagnosed with a rare type of breast cancer at 32, my goodness, that's young. I think it's the shock and all the release of emotions for all involved. The words blur into each other. It's very hard to take it all in.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why I think people should ideally have a nurse or some sort of therapist in the room, so that they can then, because the doctor only has say 10, 15 minutes. And this is what happened to Maggie with Maggie's centres. She was given a diagnosis, actually in my home county of Dumfries and Galloway. And it was kind of like, okay, off you go. I've got another patient to see. And there was nowhere for her to go. She was in this stunned state of just having been given the diagnosis. And you have to suddenly walk out of this room, and you may not have been given permission to cry, or you're kind of numb from the very first diagnosis, I believe. And I haven't actually gone through it myself, but I've seen enough people being given the diagnosis, and I really believe that they need an advocate to go with them to another room and just talk for a few minutes, maybe give them a brochure, and then say, call me. You may be a bit stunned for a day or so, and then call me and I'll help you answer any questions. And you'll come back and you'll see the doctor, because they're then going to discuss how they're going to treat you.
Well, I've put the link in the chat to the Maggie's centres. Please do look it up. Maggie's Cancer Centres, there's several around the country. There's sadly not as many as we'd hope, because they're just very expensive to run, but they are absolutely wonderful. You can look up where your nearest one is. I know that my sister has found it extremely helpful. I found them very helpful when my mum was diagnosed. So it doesn't even have to be that you yourself are the patient. If you have questions about anything to do with cancer, it would be really, really good for you to look up their work. And they always need fundraisers as well. I'll just say that. But they are amazing.
Yeah, they are. There's about 14 centres currently. Sadly, there's not one in Dumfries and Galloway, but Maggie was so upset with the way she was treated, and she had the money that she could get things initiated. And they are amazing resources, and they're the places that will allow you to go and talk. There are therapists there. There's coffee mornings there where you can talk with other patients going through procedures, and they're an amazing support system.
They offer kind of classes, they offer massage that's suitable for people with cancer. They tell you all the kind of questions, anything you might think are silly questions, you can just ask. So definitely. And of course, you've got Macmillan as well. They also have a counselling service. So really important. Now, we've got a comment here that I'd like you to address. You'll not get me having another mammogram, exclamation mark. There are better, less painful ways now. And until that is freely available, I'll wait. Oh, gosh, I just want to say, please get your mammogram. But I'm not a nurse. I just, there's someone with a sister with breast cancer. Please have a mammogram.
You get squeezed. And it doesn't matter whether you're big or small, it is uncomfortable. That's really to do with the training of the radiologist, because they can make it not uncomfortable. It's really valuable, because they can pick up nodes that look suspicious. And then they go on to see, they will actually further research you and do biopsies, because 90% of the lumps that they can see on a mammogram are actually benign. There's nothing wrong with you, just may have lumpy, bumpy breasts. So I would emphasize it's really important to keep going. It's the quickest at the moment. It is the quickest way to see the small ones. And you want to get the lumps when they're small. You can't even.
Is there any alternative for someone who's really that scared? Is there an alternative?
I don't know that there is, actually.
No? Okay.
I get possibly an MRI, but I'm not possibly an MRI, but that's an expensive procedure. But for, the next thing, of course, is doing actually physical once a month breast exam. But mammograms can pick up lumps that you can't feel.
Yeah. Thank you. So I can understand that some people are very scared of the pain, but please don't neglect your health.
It's not that uncomfortable. It is uncomfy, but it's only going to last for about a minute. I
always take painkillers before I go in. I don't know if that would help. I do, because I'm a big wuss. I get them annually because of my sister, and I get them annually, and I have them for quite a long time, and for which I feel very grateful. And it's not my favorite day of the year, but I am very happy that I get that. I do hope that people who are listening to this will.
And if you are going to take a pain medication, take it 2 hours before the procedure, because that's when the maximum effect of the pain pill occurs.
Well, there's a good tip. I thought it was 1 hour. So there we are. That's really
1 to 2 hours. But if I was scared, I'd make sure I had it on board 2 hours.
We've got a question here. Is insurance for healthcare in Australia as prohibitive as in the USA, or is the Australian healthcare same as the NHS in the UK?
You know, I haven't been in Australia now for probably 30 years, so 30, even 40 years. So I honestly don't know. I'm not sure what their insurance is. It certainly would not be as prohibitive and as expensive. The other thing in America is they sometimes will not even insure you. If you are a risk, you don't get coverage. Now that has changed more with Obamacare, but
I know that when I've been in Australia, it's similar to the UK, that you do pay a little bit more, but it's nothing like in America. We've got a comment saying how wonderful Macmillan is. They're amazing, very supportive, and recommending them. And someone who the breast lump was too far in to be felt, so that's why a mammogram is really important. Thank you for sharing that. Another person saying, don't delay a mammogram. I had no symptoms and DCIS was found. I had a lumpectomy and radiotherapy and I'm fine now. Thank you for sharing that. Gosh, so it's something that's really affecting many people here. So to go back to your book has been described as a manual. And there are some great recommendations online from doctors and other healthcare professionals. Why do you think this hadn't been written before? I mean, do you think people are just too scared of talking about these things, or do you think they just assume that everybody knows it?
Well, I actually wrote this about 30 years ago. And then I tried to get it published very briefly, but I was moving back from America to England and I was busy and it got put on the back burner. I'm ashamed to say it got put on the back burner for quite a while. And it was actually COVID that made me think I should really I thought if I don't die from COVID, I'm going to be creative. And so I thought, right, I'm going to bring this back up and refresh it. And I was just, maybe the timing was just right, but I literally got a company called Routledge. It's Taylor and Francis group. And, normally one of the hardest jobs is to actually get to have a manuscript approved and developed. And it just literally happened within like 2 or 3 weeks. I couldn't believe it. It was obviously in a way meant to be. But the book is actually a 3-parter. The first part is about if you get diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, and it could be cancer, it could be a life-shortening illness like Lou Gehrig's, which is also known as motor neuron disease. So the first part is really about taking a look at that and getting treated and being allowed to express your fears so that you have a better chance of healing. And then the second part is to do with getting organized. You know, we prepare for births and we prepare for marriages, but we don't prepare for death. And we're all going to die sometime, whether we're 50 or 100. And so I really push about writing a will, because if you don't write a will, and people are funny, they think that if they write a will, somehow they're going to die sooner. And
Yep.
so it's like tempting death. So it's like, write a will so that the government doesn't have to decide who gets your money. And it doesn't take 2 or 3 years of being in probate before you can actually get the proceeds from the will. It makes life easier for everybody. And you can always change your will. I first wrote my first will when I was about 26 for some reason. And I have periodically, changed it. If I've fallen out with people, they've gone out of my will. Likewise, if you have somebody that you intend to give money to and they've passed on, then again, you can adjust your will. And it's there. And once you've written it down, you can forget about it. You can get on with life. Same thing with a list of your bank accounts, who you're banking with, passwords for computers, passwords for your phone. I had a situation where my uncle said to me, as an executor of the will, he said to me, "Oh, the lawyer knows everything." Well, we found out that the lawyer knew nothing apart from the will. And so we had to go through papers and papers. And for some reason, he had everything on little yellow Post-it notes like BOS. Well, that meant the Bank of Scotland, but it took us a while to figure that one out. And so it's really easy. It makes life easier. Even simple things like, where do you want your pets to go? You know, who do you want your pets to go to? Because a lot of people don't know these things. So write it down, make it simple, and then put it away. It'll take you, 1 or 2 days. It's not a quick job, but then you can put it away in your file or your safety deposit box or whatever. So there's lots of different things. And also, how do you want, when you do die, how would you like your funeral? Do you want to be buried or cremated? What hymns would you like? What prayers would you like? Maybe you want to have a willow coffin. It's so many things. And like I said, we get so organized in every detail of a marriage, but we do nothing about death. We just think, oh, we'll ignore that till down the road. But, the sad thing is, you get these 21-year-olds who are on a motorbike and they die. Death happens, unfortunately, at any age. Yeah. So, and then the third part of the book is about living life now. Making amends if you've upset somebody, and it could be 20 years ago, but if it's still bothering you, write a letter, post it, write a letter and throw it away. It'll relieve you of that distress and of that heaviness. Being grateful. We've been given this gift of life. Try to be grateful every day. Just once, when you go to bed at night, think of one good thing that happened. Maybe a baby smiling at you or putting out its hand to hold you, or, your cat purring on your lap, and just say thank you. Thank you for, and then life is so much for living now, because you never know when you're not going to be here, and enjoy it, and if you're not happy doing what you're doing right now, look at how you can change it, but look at how you can change it responsibly. Don't just suddenly take off to, Morocco and not tell everybody that you've gone there. It's like, do the changes responsibly. But some people say that getting a diagnosis of cancer actually was a gift, because it makes them look at how they're living life.
Yeah, I've heard that from people who've had, illnesses where they, luckily they've recovered from, where they've said, right, this made me think I need to sort my life out. So it's incredible. We've had got a comment here. I'm currentently doing an end of life course, which is very interesting. That is extraordinary. I'd love to know a little bit more about that. If you wouldn't mind putting that in. I don't know who that's through, if it's through is it through a hospital or a hospice or something? How fascinating.
Well, they have a hospice nurses and palliative care, which is what that can be an end of life training. They now have what they call some people call them death doulas, D-U-A-L-A. Doula is the other name for a midwife, and so it can be assisting the soul to come into life And it can also be assisting the soul to leave.
We actually, I interviewed somebody a couple of months ago called Mandy Priest on PPG, she calls herself a soul midwife, but she said the other word is a death doula. And she was absolutely fascinating. And I know that there were lots of people here who were probably there then as well, who just found her really fascinating. I'm just putting, somebody has asked for the name of your book, so I'm putting the title into it. And also I'm putting the link to Carolyn's book on Amazon on here, because it's not on bookshop.org, so I put it on Amazon. So thank you for the query. That, yes, I think having you after having had Mandy Priest on is actually really fascinating, because you're saying a lot of really similar things about living for now, you know, and preparing for the end of life. So we have a comment here. Carolyn is so right about organization. There is so much to do after a death. Oh yeah, tell me about it. I have friends who have no idea about the financial side of their marriage. And that is a very important comment. Yeah,
it's so important. And it's especially if you don't have a partner. If you are a single person, you know, who knows what your desires are? Who knows, you know, what your combination of your safe is? All sorts of just practical things.
Yes.
And like I said, once you've written it down, you can then forget about it. You're not being morbid. You're not sort of, you know, you're just being practical.
There's another comment here that says, I worked with a lady years ago whose son died at 26, and she always encouraged us young ones to make our wills.
Ah, interesting. Yeah.
So, and this is the course is via a local college. It's over Zoom, a pre-course to go into care work. It's not being a soul midwife, it's going into, what an interesting thing. Thank you very much for sharing that. That's fascinating. So you left, Carolyn, you left mainstream nursing a few years ago to set up a complementary therapies clinic. What prompted you to do that? And what lessons do you think you can share from that experience? Or what did you think you learned from that?
What prompted me? I've always been interested in I like to call it complementary rather than alternative, because it's not alternative. It's an addition to traditional medicine.
Yeah, very good point.
The problem tends to be is that we're trained as doctors and nurses to look at a condition. We're not trained to look at the whole person. So in fact, it's a one example. You can have knee pain, but that knee pain may actually be referred pain from your hip. But the person's focusing on the knee and doesn't see a problem, whereas in fact it's the hip's causing the problem and it reflects down to the knee. That's where acupuncture works well, because you know you have a pin stuck in your ankle and it sorts your shoulder out. And you think, well, how did that happen? Because we are a unit, if you like. You know, we have one skin covering the whole of us. And so what I like about complementary therapies is they do look at the whole person, not just the knee condition. I remember I was doing, you know, Reiki is quite a popular thing. And I said to this lady, I was working at an evening class, not class, but where people could come. And I said, well, what's your problem? And she said, well, I've got a hip problem. So I was thinking my hands would be drawn to her hip. And in fact, they were drawn to her ankle. And afterwards, I said to her, do you happen to have a problem in your ankle? And she goes, oh, yes, I forgot about that. So you see, and very often with healing, the energy knows where to go. So it'll draw you to the ankle in this case, because it may be that the ankle, again, going back to different parts of the body, may in fact be increasing the pain at the hip because there's some connection in the ankle that's creating the problem for the hip. And so, yeah, we are a whole being, and we're also a spiritual being, not just a physical body. We are a spiritual being. And so, you know, we have needs, emotional needs and physical and mental needs. And very often the complementary therapist will look at that. And when they're doing a healing, it may well be that the whole of us is taken care of, or at the very least, we feel less stressed. And then promotes healing.
And stress, of course, is such a factor in ill health, isn't it?
Yeah, huge. In mental health, in physical health, you know, people that have high blood pressure, a lot of the time is because of stress, or ulcers, stomach ulcers. Again, it's caused by stress. So the more we can minimize stress, the better we function.
Yeah. So Goldster is all about healthy aging, and of course your book really helps with it, not just with, as you say, it's not just about those who've been diagnosed, it's everybody. What would be your top tips to give to people to take away from this? What should they be doing if that, to make sure they are living as healthy, kind of emotionally healthy as well as physically healthy life as possible?
Yeah. I advocate a bit of meditation or just sitting quietly. People talk about mindfulness, but I try to sit down for 10, 15 minutes a day with nothing, the phone switched off, and just try to, if you like, go within and just try to find that place of who is Carolyn, and just be there and sit there. And some people call it meditation. It don't have to be fancy. You don't have to go to classes to do. Just to be. It's very hard actually to just sit and be quiet. You can never get rid of the brain thoughts that are going through, but you can minimize them as you're sitting to meditate. And I must admit, when I first started meditating, it was the very last thing I would do, and it was the very first thing I would stop doing if I got busy. But I find now, if I just give myself that 10 to 15 minutes a day, and I usually try and do it in the morning, my day goes better. And I know it's going to sound bizarre, but I feel like the green lights come on more quickly as I'm going, traveling from A to B. I do ask for parking spots, and I oftentimes get them. I know people don't believe that, but it's intent, really. My bottom line would be, are you happy? And what makes you happy? And it's not often the goods or the fancy house or the fancy car. It's a question of being happy within. Are you content? And I used to think when I was younger, that if you were content, it was a bit like a cow munching in a grass in a field. And I used to love the drama. But as I've got older, hence I went into intensive care. As I've got older, I like to just be content. And I really do believe that if you are as content as you can be, then I think life is better for you. And reevaluate. Have you got stuck in a rut? Have you in fact got yourself a job that you really don't like, but you put up with it because it pays well? Well, that's fine if that's all you can get, but can you get something else? Have you just gone into a habit? Have a look. If you only had 6 months to live, what would you be doing? And so, take a look at my book. I give a lot of tips about what kind of lists, what to think about. And also when it comes to the end of life, it's also in a will, you can specify, if you have an accident and you're in a coma, do you want to, and it's permanent, you're going to be in a vegetative state, do you want to have everything done? Do you want to be resuscitated if you arrest? Or do you want to be treated humanely, pay medication, and allowed to pass peacefully? Depends. It's not so much about the quantity of life. Oftentimes it's the quality of the life. Are you having a good quality of life?
I was going to ask you precisely about that. Yeah. Because you talk in your book about quality of life versus quantity of life. And of course, letting people know in your life what your wishes are as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's where the will comes in. Hopefully you could talk to somebody, but they're not very often, they forget. I've had a friend who just said there's one particular nursing home, if she needs it, she'd like to go into. And then I forgot about that. And then she reminded me, and I thought, that's why it's important to write things down, because it's easy to forget.
But of course, the will is looked at after you've died. If it's something like, you want to do not resuscitate, you do need to let your
absolutely. There's a thing called an advanced directive, and ideally have one. You can get the form at a stationer's, but some of the practices actually have the forms to give to you, and it will specify, what do you want? Do you want to be treated with antibiotics? Do you want to just be allowed to pass on? What is it you want? And the other important thing is, it's kind of changed now. Now it's automatically assumed that that you will donate your organs, unless you specify you don't want to. And I think that's a great step forward.
I do. I agree. I think it's a really good step forward, because of course you might have had the desire to do so, but your family members might not know that, or might just say no because they've got other ideas. And very, very important.
Also, if things are written down, it's much easier for the medical profession to make decisions, because if you have 4 members of your family coming, and 2 say, oh, she'll be happy to go, and 2 say, oh, no, we've got to do everything for her. The doctors are also fearful of being sued because unfortunately Britain's becoming a bit more like America in that way. And it helps the doctor make the decision if they've got something written down that says, no, I don't want to be resuscitated, or, yes, I do. Then they haven't got to depend on family telling them and having different opinions.
Well, you talked about quality of life earlier. We've got a really nice comment here from a lady who's had breast cancer before, and I'm waiting for the result of my mammogram at the moment. I find it helpful to live as much as possible in the present moment. Put your focus into your everyday tasks, even making tea or coffee, and not overthink the what ifs or trying to predict the outcome. I always say future does not exist. It's only the here and now.
Absolutely, that's very well said. It's kind of like, don't do any backpacking, which is looking at the past, and don't do any future tripping. Stay in the present, because that's all we have. There's a wonderful story actually of I don't know if you know the book Anne of Green Gables, but when she goes to school and she's told by the teacher to sit here for the present, and she goes home at the end of the day and she says to her mother, it's her adopted mother, I wasn't given a present. So it's like, sit here for the present. All we have is today.
Yes, absolutely.
So whoever that lady was that made that comment, very, very well said. Yeah.
Thank you. Somebody else has said, is it a good idea to make lasting powers of attorney as well as your will, or is a living will better?
Both. You need both.
Okay.
The power of attorney helps people, like if you get Alzheimer's, helps them deal with your bank accounts and stuff, whereas the living will is more to do with your medical condition and to do with if you are, say, in a vegetative state, do you want everything done for you, or do you want to just be allowed to go?
Yeah. So when you were working in your complementary therapies clinic, did you feel that there were things that you wished you could change about the mainstream medical profession? Were there things that you kind of took into the new life from your old life, and things you wish you could have done it the other way around?
I was lucky because having the RN qualification, RGN qualification, if I gave feedback to the doctors, they were more likely to listen to what I was saying. So very often I would write a letter if somebody came to the doctor to say, with the person's permission, to say what my findings were or what had happened. Some doctors are getting much better at including complementary therapy. In some places it's called CAD, complementary and alternative. But really it should be side by side. Yeah.
We have another question here. Is a living will the same as an advanced directive?
Yes.
It is. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. I'm just going to ask Carolyn to stay here for 1 minute. And if you've got any other questions, please put them in the chat, because I need to tell you all what's coming up on Goldster. But Carolyn, please don't go anywhere. So on Purpose, Passion, Grit, as you know, we have this every Tuesday for those of you who haven't been to it before. And next week, you've got Humphrey Hawksley talking to Vaughan Smith, the visionary founder of the Frontline Club in London, a gathering place for war correspondents, politicians, movers and shakers. He gave sanctuary to Julian Assange after WikiLeaks and is currently leading hostile environment training to keep journalists as safe as they can be in the Ukraine. Really, really fascinating. And then the following week, Alistair Hicknell is back talking to Pat Murphy. Pat Murphy has reported on sport for over 50 years. After starting with the Birmingham Post, he moved into broadcasting with the BBC, becoming a mainstay of their radio coverage. He's written more than 40 books, mainly on football and cricket. His most recent, a celebration of BBC's Sports Reports, the longest running sports radio programme, is due out, was just come out actually a couple of weeks ago. And then on the 29th of November, you've got Rosie Stancer, who is, of course, our resident explorer. I say resident, she's off exploring at the moment. And from wherever she's going to be in the world at that time, she is going to be exploring, it's going to be interviewing fellow explorer Pen Hadow, famous for being a polar explorer and writing the book Solo. Absolutely fascinating. It's going to be, she's such an interesting discussion. And I just want to say, who my next month's guest is, and I'm talking to Leroy Logan, who is the former superintendent of the Met Police. This is not until the end of December. He retired in 2013 after 30 years service, and is also a former chair and founding member of the Black Police Association. And you may have recently watched the BBC TV series called Small Axe. And in fact, Leroy's life was featured in that, what it was like joining the Met as a Black police officer in the 60s or 70s. I can't remember exactly what year he joined, I think in the 70s. Really interesting man, very, very fascinating. Now on Book Club this week, I have got two really interesting guests. On Thursday, I'm talking to Stephen Barker, the author of this book, The Flying Sikh. I haven't ever met him, but I had a really lovely phone chat with him this morning. I'm very much looking forward to it. It's going to be fascinating. He's also a museum consultant. I'm keen to know precisely what he does. And then on Friday, I'm talking to Tessa Dunlop, who's the author of many books, including this one, Army Girls. Of course, it's Remembrance Week this week, so that's why I'm talking to both of these authors. But she's also got a brand new book out on Elizabeth and Philip. She's also, you've probably seen her on TV. She's a broadcaster and does all sorts of fascinating things. So that is what's coming up. So back to Carolyn now. We have a comment here. It's important to find some humor every day. Even in dire situations, a laugh makes you feel better. What do you think about that? Is laughter really
Absolutely, absolutely. There's actually a whole thing about, there was a book came out called Humor is Good Medicine. Absolutely. I recommend if people have to go into hospital, take a couple of videos of comedy videos, because laughter is almost like an internal massage. You know, when you really have a good belly laugh, you breathe better, you breathe more deeply. It releases endorphins. It's so good for you. So yes, have a giggle a day if you can. Even if it's just something silly, like you look at your face and you've got some smudge on your cheek, you know, laugh. Sometimes it's hard to laugh, especially when but try to see the funny side if you can, and if you can't, put a video on that's a comedy, you know, and just some of the older ones are the better ones, I think. But yeah, it's good to laugh. I do
an online yoga class that I was doing during, it's not actually a Goldster one, it was one I was doing before I joined Goldster in the first lockdown, and I bought that video, and whenever I watch it, I think about the fact, because there's one bit where she says, you know, you're doing all these postures, and then she says, and turn the corners of your mouth up. And it always makes you feel better at that moment. And I always go, oh, I know it's coming, but it does. It genuinely does. If you're in a bit of a grumpy mood or feeling sad and you smile, what is that science behind that? Why does smiling make you feel better?
Well, it causes you to use more muscles. Is it a frown or smile? I can't remember. But if you look up, when you're feeling down, you tend to look down. If you look up, you can actually feel some energy increasing in the back of your head when you look up. So look up, get out into nature, you know, go look at the sky. I mean, probably right now it's up here, it's raining, but you know,
look at the sky.
Yeah. And there's actually a thing called laugh therapy, where you actually, it's maybe something similar to what you just said, because they actually start to laugh and they go ha ha ha, ha. And that also makes you push down your diaphragm, and again it improves circulation.
Well, we've got a comment here that I'm guessing smiling releases endorphins. Maybe it does.
It does. Yeah.
All I know is that when I do that bit in the yoga class, even though I know it's coming, and I do it, and it does genuinely work. So
yeah.
I can't explain why, but it definitely does work. For those of you who are new to Goldster, I don't know if some of you, this might be your first time, just so that you know, Goldster is, as we know, PPG is part of the free program. It is a subscription program on Goldster, and we have lots of other classes, really, really worth it. There's special deals at the moment, so do look at the website. And I know that people often who come to this say how much they love the yoga, the Pilates, the Tai Chi. In fact, if you want to recommend any yoga classes, any Goldster classes, please do put the comment into the chat in the next minute or so, because we're going to have to end quite soon. But I think it's fantastic how many people here go to so many different classes on Goldster. Do you think that is important, Carolyn, to keep your body physically and mentally healthy at the same time?
Absolutely. I think a little bit of physicality, you know, even if you're stuck in a chair, you know, you can do leg and arm exercises. But yes, ideally, if you can, go out into nature, get some fresh air. But yes, exercises for the brain as well as the body. I mean, doing something like a crossword or a Sudoku, or it's really good. And we can always learn. That's where U3A is so good, because you can always learn. You're never too old to learn. And there's so many classes available, and there's evening classes, and Yeah, I think we should learn until we die, basically. I think, you know, because I think we're always learning, no matter how old we get to be.
We've got a comment here saying, highly recommend the Goldster Pilates classes. Yes, I haven't. Tonight's class with Sarah Vass is my absolute favorite. Yoga Nidra, lying in the dark and meditating. Such a calming voice. Perfect. You know, I haven't done that one yet, so thank you for that recommendation. I'm going to see if I can do that one tonight. That sounds great. And I've been meaning to try the new Pilates classes as well, so that's great, everybody. So when you were in Australia and America, the nature, of course, was very different from here. Did you feel that you had very different experiences, or do you think wherever you are in the world, it's just that calming nature?
I think, yes, I think nature can be very dramatic or very calming, like, you know, a hill and the cow munching in the field. Yes, it's a different beauty. It's Australia can be very dramatic. Any part of the world can be dramatic. The Japanese have discovered that it's good to go into the forest and lie down. So they're doing a whole new thing about forest walks. But yes, it's get out there, breathe a bit, and it doesn't have to be long, 10, 15 minutes. I'm not good at that. I mean, I should be much more active, and I'm not. But yeah, but I really just think it's, yeah, seize the day. Is, you know, carpe diem, seize the day, because that's all we really have is today.
Brilliant.
And
be
prepared. You know, be prepared. You know, get your will done. You know, but enjoy today, because that's what you have.
So basically, if you think about it, like doing your tax return, you know, every year I think, oh no, and then actually I spend that kind of day or two doing my tax return, and afterwards I think, sure, it's actually quite cleansing to do this. Much as I hate it and I put it off, and my accountant emails you and I think, oh no, I've got to do it. And believe me, when you're freelance and you do about 4 different jobs, it is a nightmare. But there's this kind of afterwards, I thought, oh wow, I'm really glad I did that. I've got more of an idea of, you know, what I was doing over the last year, things I shouldn't be spending so much on, or whatever it is. So perhaps doing your will is like that. It kind of helps you feel, well, I've done that now. And that
a lot of people will say, oh, I know I should, you know, but they put it off and they put it off. So just do it, you know, and then you've done it, and then you can think, I can forget all about that now.
Got a comment here saying, does feel better once it's done. And
absolutely.
Another recommendation for the Gentle Yoga with Hannah Joseph. Great for starting the day. I agree. Wonderful class. Thank you, Carolyn. It has been an absolute joy to have you on here. I really appreciate it. And we definitely don't talk enough about death in our culture. And I think it's truly important, because, as you say, it will come to all of us, whether it's personally or the death of a loved one, which you know, we really need to have more time preparing for. So it has been an absolute joy to talk to you, even about things that would be seen to be quite difficult. Do get hold of Carolyn's book if you think anybody could benefit from it. Here it is again, After a Life-Threatening Diagnosis, What's Next, and read through it and find out, you know, the tips for talking about it. And you know, it's a manual not just for people, as you say, who've had a diagnosis.
Yeah, it's actually a manual for all of us. It's
the
first part is to do with somebody who has been diagnosed with something, but the second and third part are all to do with, you know, being organized and enjoying life, and don't put life off till tomorrow.
Thank you so much. We're going to finish on that note. Carolyn and I will now turn off our videos. Take care, everybody. I will see you, I hope, on Thursday and Friday. Have a great couple of days. Bye.